All right, guys. Welcome to the Story X, the show. Today, we're joined by our first guest on the podcast. So, as always, my name's Adam Myers. I'm the head of growth at Story X, a marketing agency for fitness and martial arts businesses. Today, we have Joe Saunders, the creator and host of the Managing Violence podcast. It's a managing violence, not creating violence. A business consultant and lifelong martial artist. Joe, thanks for being on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure. Happy to support the show.
Yeah, brilliant. Joe, before we get started, a lot of things. You're like me, a lot of things going on. Podcast, business coaching, martial arts training when you can, obviously, because we're both in Melbourne and we're closed in. We're locked down. How's the lockdown experience been for you?
And you know what? It's been interesting. I'm a kind of extroverted guy, so I didn't think it was bothering me very much. And then as the months dragged on, and I realized it's been like 6 months since I've had a social interaction with someone I'm not related to, it's dragged on a little bit. Thankfully, I've had the medium of my podcast going, so I get to talk to people all over the world, more or less every day in some way or another. So I guess the virtual experience is there, but I am missing human beings and certainly missing training with other people. That's been something that I didn't realize I was missing until recently. So man, you just make the best of it you can. And we're talking offline about the pivot and that catchphrase of being agile and adaptive and pivoting. And we did that with our business. Like we had a plan of what we were going to do in 2020, and come March, that was completely different. So we had to do a quick pivot and focus on other areas that were going to service people better. So it's been interesting. Nothing to complain about. I mean, everyone I know is healthy and happy. So could be worse.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we had to do the same thing with the pivoting. So with our martial arts school, we had to go to Zoom kind of online classes straight away. I think it was the 23rd of March, we were told, you're not open that day. We're not open on the 23rd of March. It was the first day of the lockdown here in Melbourne. And that day we were like, email sent out, here's the link, see you at 4:30 kind of on Zoom. Didn't have a lot of real pushback, I guess. It was kind of like more a technological education than it was, some of the parents and stuff and didn't really know how to use the iPads properly, or they wanted to Chromecast it to the TV and things like that. And they wanted the kid to be able to watch me on TV doing the class.
Yep.
So we had a bit of a problem with more technology, more than like the attitude towards online, which is really interesting because I thought being such a physical business, as you know, running a martial arts school it's a lot about being there and that presence you have in the room and, the instructor at the front, drawing everyone's attention in and going through fine details is hard, on a two-dimensional screen.
Yeah, and even just like you don't realize, I think, I didn't realize until I started trying to teach some things online how much you feed off the energy in the room, and you can feel whether people are getting it or they're not getting it, or they're into it or they're not into it. Like you can change your pace, you can change your delivery, you can change all sorts of things that you probably do subconsciously just because you're experienced and you know what the class needs. Mm-hmm. And when you're not in the same room, it's amazing how hard that is to do. Like it feels a little bit more like you may as well pre-record the class, and just upload it. Do like aerobic style. But,
and there was a segment of the market that did that pre-recorded content and put it up, and I think that worked well for a period of time.
Yeah.
There was a major player here in Melbourne, Hall's Taekwondo, one of the biggest Taekwondo schools in Australia, and they did pre-recorded content, I think, for a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so. And then I think once they realized we were in this for 5-6 months, pre-recorded wasn't going to cut it long term, and now they've reverted back to doing Zoom. Yeah.
I mean, look, it's I know certainly some of the instructors I know that work on a seminar basis that travel around. They've put a lot of energy into creating downloadable content now, which I think is good for that market. Where you don't typically have like that ongoing personal relationship with your students anyway, so you're not losing out on much. And it's a good opportunity when you've got time free to start creating some passive income, to create some information products that you can keep selling afterwards as well. So I think that's something we'll talk about today, I guess, with the podcasting.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously this is my first foray into the podcast world. I'm really happy to have a very experienced guest in the first one. You gave me a book recommendation the other day. I'm halfway through that book.
Awesome.
I get right into it. Yeah. So let's talk about your podcast, Managing Violence. I've listened to a fair few times. I listened to the Tim Kennedy episode a couple days ago.
Yep.
Tell me about your podcast.
Right. So it's funny. The Managing Violence podcast didn't start with any great plan. It was just, I I was looking to listen to conversations with certain people, and I was a big podcast listener and had been for years. And I started Googling or searching on Apple Podcasts for people that might have interviewed these handful of people I was looking to listen to, and that they just weren't out there. No one had been talking to these people, these authors like Rory Miller and instructors like Richard Dimitri and Matt Larson and Tony Blauer and people like that. They just weren't being interviewed as much as I thought they should be. And I thought, the handful of conversations that I did find were very superficial. Like they were being interviewed by someone who didn't have a deep knowledge of the art or of their background or of what differentiated them from anyone else in the self-defense community. And I thought, man, I could do a better job than this. Like, I feel like there's a gap here. And I just wanted to have the conversation. I didn't really even think about a lot of people listening. I just sort of wanted to have that conversation. So I started off on my own, and I thought maybe I can just do a couple of solo episodes and share what I know. And I started doing that. And I thought maybe one day I'll end up getting, some of the higher name guests. I thought, I'm a nobody. Like, who are they going to, why would they come and talk to me? And it just randomly, I was connected on Facebook with Rory Miller already. Just one of those cheeky Facebook friend requests you send to someone you admire, and they happen to approve it. So I was already connected with him, and I sent him a message saying, look, I'm starting this podcast. So I'd love to have you on one day. If you're ever interested, just let me know. And I was expecting like nothing. And he came back and said, sure, when do you want to do it? And I was like, wow, that was like one of my bucket list guests. I was like, maybe one day I'll get Rory Miller. And I think he was like episode 4. So, so they kind of got me started, and then that got a little bit of attention, and then I was able to leverage that to get other guests. And as the seasons have gone on, it's changed from me having to hunt guests to, I'm in a pretty fortunate position at the moment where guests are coming to me because they want to be associated with the other people I've already had on the show. And it's almost like my show has become a validation that if you're serious in the self-defense community, then you should be on the show, which is very cool. It's a very cool evolution. And in a way, it's dragged up my credibility alongside the guests that I'm interviewing. Yeah,
you've kind of, instead of looking for the people with the most notches on their belt, you've kind of become one of the notches on the belt.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah. Like, you know what? Look, I was sitting back and thinking about it. I've had hundreds of hours of conversation now with the very best minds in the business, and it can't help but improve my knowledge. Right? If I had the same knowledge and the same attitude now as I had 2 years ago, then I've wasted that time tremendously. And I don't know there's many other people in the world that have had that level of conversation with that many leading experts in this field. So yeah, in a way, it certainly has upskilled me. But if from a business point of view, it's been great.
Yeah, brilliant. I really like about your podcast that you really go through the detail and that background knowledge of your guests. That's been really important to me because obviously as a martial artist myself, I've been listening to your podcast on and off for the last probably year or so that we've been connected. Yep. Your martial arts background is pretty diverse. Mm-hmm. Talk us through a little bit about your martial arts background. What led you into managing violence?
Yeah, it's a good story. So I basically grew up with 2 older brothers who are much older, 13 years and 15 years older than me, who were both into Taekwondo when they were teenagers. So I grew up with my brothers watching Bruce Lee movies and Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, and there was always a martial arts movie on TV. And they were always bringing home trophies and medals, and they'd give them to their little baby brother, which I thought was the coolest thing in the world, that had these medals and trophies up in my room. So I was like pestering my mum and dad to let me start as soon as I could. So I started Taekwondo when I was 4. Mm-hmm. And the club at the time only took on 5-year-olds, but they made an exception for me, which was nice. So I started at 4, and then we actually moved around. So my family moved quite a bit in my early life throughout primary school, and every time we'd move to a new town, we're moving mostly in regional areas, so you couldn't always stick to the same art. And nearly every time we moved, I would have to pick up a different martial art because it's like, here are your options. Here's the ones that are $5 or less and or less.
Yeah, I get it. I completely understand.
And you can get there from school. You pick that one. So cool. Yeah. So I got to dabble in things. So I started off in Taekwondo. I did a little bit of Kyokushin karate. I did a little bit of boxing, a little bit of kickboxing, a little bit of Goju-Ryu. just wherever I went, I picked up something, which at the time was frustrating because I felt like I was never progressing in rank, right? Because everywhere I started, I was a white belt again. As an adult, you look back on that and go, man, what an amazing foundation that you got the white belt skills of like all these different styles and different perspective and different ways of looking at things. And certainly as I got more serious as an adult, I was able to, I guess, more readily see the application of principles. Like I'd be doing judo and I would see the application of a Goju-Ryu principle or a Wing Chun principle, and I'd be able to say, these movement is movement. So you'd be able to take in these different principles and apply them in different ways. But so that was early life. I took a break from martial arts for a couple of years and played rugby league. I was growing up in Queensland, so I played rugby league competitively for a couple of years. Ended up getting my face broken really badly when I was 13 or 14. And I wasn't allowed to do any more rugby league for a couple of years because I had to have surgery and growth plates and yada, yada. I wasn't allowed to. Yep. So I started lifting weights. And I was at a gym lifting weights. And on a Saturday afternoon, I came out and I saw these guys in the corner suplexing each other on mats. And I'd grown up a big pro wrestling fan as well. So I just saw these guys throwing each other around. And I thought that looked awesome. I went over and asked what they were doing. And they were one of the very, very few amateur wrestling clubs, a Greco-Roman freestyle wrestling club in Redcliffe in Queensland. And just completely right place at the right time. The people in that group that I approached on that day, the coach was Yuri Markov, who was a former assistant coach of the USSR national team.
Wow.
So in terms of a guy to stumble across.
That's a lucky guy to find at a gym.
I know, right?
Yeah.
He was working as a janitor. And Dan Higgins was one of the athletes. So Dan Higgins was the founder of Integrated MMA, one of the greatest MMA coaches and now jiu-jitsu coaches in the country. Mm-hmm. And he was a competitive fighter at the time. I think Dan was like 25, 26, and he was fighting in Japan in rings. Yeah. And Aaron Stapleton, who was a multi-time national champion in Greco-Roman. And those were the three guys that were training there. So I hooked up with those guys. I started training, and the absolute hardest training I've ever done in my life. Like, you got to train hard, go do wrestling. I've never done anything harder than wrestling ever.
I agree.
And also I was like 16 years old, right? And I was in a club that was exclusively adults. Dan was the next youngest guy at 25. And the only people that were coming to train with us were aspiring MMA fighters, or actually we didn't even call it MMA. This is like 2001. So it was like NHB fighters.
No holds barred for the people who don't know what he's talking about. It's not the NHL. It's on hockey. There's a lot of punches though. Yeah. No holds barred fighting. It was the very early stages of mixed martial arts, as you guys know it now.
These guys were still fighting bare knuckle, most of the fights were put on by bikies, and like it was dodgy. Yeah. So the guys were rough and tough, and it was a good environment for a 16-year-old to rapidly figure out his place in the pack. To sort of try and speed the story up, I ended up my coach went back to Russia for a little bit of time over Christmas one year, and I wanted to keep training, so I picked up judo. And judo had a really robust competition structures, and that appealed to me because in wrestling in Australia at that time, you really had like the New South Wales state titles and the national titles, and that was about it. That was the only place you could compete. And even then, like the nationals was like the only place I could compete against people my own age. Whereas in judo, I could compete like every 2 weeks. And that was interesting to me. And I always loved submissions and stuff as well. So being able to do my wrestling and also be able to choke people and armbar people and things like that, that was pretty cool. So I switched to judo, got to an international level in judo. I absolutely fell in love with it. And that led me into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I started doing BJJ back in 2006. And just sort of tried to round out my ground game because I always loved the ground game of judo, and BJJ was obviously a natural evolution of that. That also led me into sumo wrestling. I got to represent Australia in sumo wrestling as well. Wow. And I basically developed, like, I realized at the age of 16 that I was much better at grabbing people and throwing them around than I was at hitting people. And I have a very good judo defense to being punched in the face, which is just keeping my hands down and getting punched a lot until I can grab people. So that was pretty much my sporting martial arts life. The sojourn into managing violence was that I started working as a bouncer when I was in uni. So when I was 18 years old, I started working as a bouncer to pay the bills. And I realized that there was a gap between what I'd learned in martial arts and combat sports and what I was actually dealing with in reality with, there was verbal and there was witnesses and there was people screaming at you and there's slippery floors and there's multiple people and there's bottles and there's grossness and there's like spit and vomit and like there's all this sorts of stuff that's not in traditional martial arts or combat sport.
Yeah, of
And
course.
people actually trying to hurt you, which is different as well.
Yeah.
The
consequences are a lot more real.
Absolutely. And there's no rules. Actually, no, that's not true. There are no rules for your attacker, but there's rules for you. There's rules in how you defend yourself. There's consequences for how you defend yourself. So that opened up a sort of a Pandora's box of what's next. And for me, that led me into reality-based self-defense through Senshido under Richard Dimitri, and then the exploration ever since. So that's really been since about 2006. I've started really diving deep. Diving deep into why and how and the deeper levels of violence beyond just the physical application of techniques.
Brilliant. Obviously that's an amazing journey kind of through multiple different styles. I don't think there would be many people in Australia who have had such a diverse background by accident. Now it's probably more common because you have if you start in MMA now, you're doing your Muay Thai, your Jiu-Jitsu, your boxing, your wrestling. There's a lot of wrestling clubs, or not really wrestling clubs, but the MMA clubs with wrestling classes or programs. But now it's like you would just do MMA, or you were kind of doing MMA without realizing you were doing MMA, or no hold barred back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, I was very average at a lot of things.
And that's essentially early MMA.
Yeah, exactly.
Early MMA was like, how hard can you throw that right hand, and can you defend a takedown?
And are you prepared to fight someone in a cage for a hot dog? Yeah,
especially the hot dog. You get 2 hot dogs if you win.
Yeah. Tell some tickets to get some popcorn as well.
Yeah. The early martial arts scene in Australia, especially with grappling, is so interesting because I remember I'm a bit younger than you. But when I started martial arts in 2007, so I would have been 15, and I started with kickboxing. Did kickboxing for 2 years with John Skeeter at a Team Ultimate in Sunshine West when he was at the community center. Out there was one of those $2 drop a thing in YMCA kind of programs. So it was kind of like hit the bags, hit the pads,
the best, man.
Ropes. Yeah. It was
how cheap martial arts used to be.
Oh yeah. And then I was looking at Anderson Silva. And Anderson Silva, GSP were kind of like my heroes. And I was like, Anderson Silva's got 3 black belts. He's got his judo black belt, his jiu-jitsu black belt, and taekwondo. And had a look around. There's no judo school around. There's no jiu-jitsu school around. Taekwondo opened up around the corner. Looks like I'm getting that one first.
Yeah, nice.
And 45 wins later, I'm a black belt, and I'm kind of traveling towards the Olympics and the national team and stuff. But during that period, I think even while I was still training for Olympics, it was would have been 2013 when MMA schools started to pop up around my area. So Dan had just opened Resilience in Footscray, and then Stuart Grant had opened up Westside MMA in Caroline Springs, and there were kind of like places popping up, and I'm like, oh wow, I can actually do this now. It's actually around. Like it was before. It was like to do jiu-jitsu, you had to drive to St Kilda. That was like the closest club to my house.
100%, man. Like most of the guys that were wrestling with me back when I was starting, those guys were traveling like an hour and a half, 2 hour round trip just to get some wrestling in because that was the only grappling they had access to.
Yeah.
And most of the judo clubs and jiu-jitsu clubs that were Japanese jiu-jitsu clubs that were around at the time, they were mostly catered to kids. So if you were a hard-nosed 22-year-old athlete that wanted to fight in a cage, you usually weren't very welcome in most of those clubs.
Yeah. I remember watching it earlier, and I always think of this one scene. There was those UFC prime time or UFC countdowns and stuff they used to do, like leading up to a main event. I think it was Shane Carwin versus Brock Lesnar, and they were doing Shane Carwin's day-to-day life, and he was spending like 3 hours in the car. He'd go like an hour to do boxing over here, then he'd drive an hour to go to his wrestling. And this is like 7 years ago. This is not a long time ago. So 2013, 14, it's not a long time ago.
No, that's crazy.
At the same time, I was doing taekwondo, I was doing judo once a week, had a local community center kind of thing, doing 2 sessions of Muay Thai, 1 session of jiu-jitsu here, and then, my 10 plus sessions of taekwondo every week. And without kind of realizing I was doing MMA. Yeah. I didn't notice. Yeah. I was like, I am doing MMA. I wasn't doing an MMA class, but I was doing all of the components of MMA without realizing. And I think a lot of people's martial arts journey, especially now, is kind of evolves that way. Even the taekwondo clubs who are kind of strictly, we're just doing taekwondo or we're just doing karate. if you don't have that ground element, you're almost seen as like, don't know if this is a word, Neanderthalic.
Yeah, well, I think, you know what, and it's an interesting conversation because I've gone through evolutions in my thinking about that as well. Like I started off kind of being kind of like an MMA snob, whereas if you're not if you're not training all ranges of combat, you're just pretending. You know, you're LARPing almost, like it's you're live action role playing. It's you're just wasting your time. And then as I got older and I started realizing what I was actually getting out of martial arts, like I didn't really care. Like I'm not getting into fights. Like I'm at home with my wife and 4 kids like 90% of my time. I'm not getting into fights in pubs. I'm not looking to compete in no holds barred or MMA competition.
Yeah.
So for me, like if I'm getting value out of what I'm doing and it's making me fit and it's giving me a social outlet and I enjoy it, then who cares? You know, like there's a place for everything. Like, yeah, okay, maybe doing some of the less practical Chinese systems, for example, it's not really my bag, but that's cool. I mean, I'd quite happily go and do a goju root class in a traditional style with no kumite or anything, and just do forms, because why not? Like if I'm enjoying it and it's hard and I get a sense of personal development, then cool. It doesn't have to be MMA.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's that's kind of coming full circle now, isn't it? Because I think there was definitely a period of time where I thought as well, I'm like, oh man, these Taekwondo guys, they've made a huge mistake.
Yeah.
My first ever Taekwondo class, my first Jiu-Jitsu class was with Michael Tomei, who's one of the best black belts in Australia. Yeah. And he was, I think Michael's only about a year older than me, or maybe 2 years older than me.
He's a beast. It doesn't matter how old.
Oh yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah. But we were like, he was similar age, and we were talking, you know, he has a black belt. He'd only just gotten his black belt, and I was kind of like pretty good at Taekwondo. At that point, I think I was on the national development team or something. And I was like, I really want to learn something. I probably know some like little wrist locks and stuff from Taekwondo self-defense, but not anything technical or specific. And he wrapped both my arms behind my back and tickled me until I tapped out. And he said, "Where's your Taekwondo black belt now?" And I was like, "I've wasted 5 years of my life." But not wasted. But now I think, I didn't waste it, because I've been able to learn faster because of I've learned how to learn. By learning Taekwondo so quickly. I've developed systems, and like you said earlier in the conversation, was really interesting that you notice the principles cross over.
Yeah, 100%.
So the principle of in Taekwondo, there's a huge, well, not a huge, but you lose a point if you fall over. So in Jiu-Jitsu, it's almost like not getting swept. So the principle of me having really good balance and never falling, I'm never letting my knee hit the ground or never putting my palm down, has really crossed over to Jiu-Jitsu and wrestling, where I'm not letting you take me down. Because I don't want to lose that 1 point in my Taekwondo match. That's not happening. Yeah.
It's I guess probably the caveat to what I said just then is that I think as long as people are making an informed decision about what they're doing and they know what they're actually being prepared for, that's okay. So I mean, from what I do now, where I'm teaching people about the realities of violence, I'm not going to send someone to a standard sport Taekwondo school and say you're going to be prepared for violence, right? It's a very tiny skill set that you're adding. That may eventually have an application, but that's not preparing you for violence. If you're doing Taekwondo because you love Taekwondo and you want to compete in Taekwondo and it's athletic and it's challenging, it's personal development and builds confidence and all that great stuff, fantastic. Just don't market it as something that it's not. And let people make that informed decision for themselves about what they're trying to achieve.
I agree.
And I think that's probably my biggest pet peeve, and for the martial arts business owners out there. Don't be ashamed of what you offer, but be understanding of what you offer. And appreciate what you offer. And if you don't like what you offer, then upskill and do something different, but don't try and market it as something different. If you don't understand the difference between sport and self-defense, or you don't understand the difference between fighting and violence and abuse and rape and real serious crime and a sparring match, then you have no right teaching either of those things. Right? You need to be honest, but don't be ashamed because you're not offering everything to everybody. Specialize.
Yeah. I think Taekwondo especially gets that. And I think points karate does a little bit, but because of the punches to the face, they don't cop it as hard as Taekwondo guys do. WTF style Taekwondo is incredibly unrealistic. I think 50% of the people, let's be honest, 75% of the people know that it's unrealistic. 25% refuse to admit they've spent 30 years doing something unrealistic. And that's fair enough. But and
you know what? Even MMA, like we sort of hold MMA up as this gold standard, but I mean, MMA is not reality. Yeah, like you're not. No one starts an MMA fight by being jumped in the car park when they've got kids under one arm and a bag full of groceries in the other hand. Like, that's not how a fight starts.
Yeah.
No one bumps into you in the street and says, "Hey, you, let's meet back here in 3 months with a referee in a training camp." Like, that doesn't happen that way. So,
I really want your wallet. Let's fight for it in 8 weeks.
yeah, exactly. Like,
Yeah.
and if you can sell some tickets, we'll both make some money. Like, that's not how reality works. And there's so many stories of great MMA fighters that have been killed in real fights by untrained people because they weren't looking for a knife, or they were jumped beforehand, or they thought they could fight 15 people and they couldn't. Like, these things happen, especially in Russia. There's been a ton of stories out of Russia of MMA fighters getting killed. So, anyway, but I think it's just a matter of being honest to yourself about what you offer and then being proud of that.
Yeah. And I think that crosses over to fitness as well. Let's segue a little bit into the fitness industry, because the fitness industry has an issue, I think, sometimes with being a personal trainer. You shouldn't be training professional athletes if you've got a certificate for in fitness. You probably shouldn't. You probably should be seeking other skills. Definitely, yeah. You probably should at least be doing, the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association course.
Level 2s,
the Olympic weightlifting course from the Australian Weightlifting Federation. Something you should be doing something extra.
Yeah.
Reading the books and listening to the podcast helps, but it doesn't help you market your business. And I guess from a marketing agency point of view, if someone says, I've got my group fitness course, I want to train professional boxers. Probably, have you been a professional boxer? And they say no. I'm like, oh man, that's going to be tough for you not only to do, it's going to be tough for you to sell and actually deliver, because this is someone's health on the line, especially when it comes to training fighters. Because if you're positioning yourself as an expert on strength and conditioning for athletes, and that's okay, but for combat athletes, it is so dangerous.
Oh, 100%.
To make someone believe they've been properly conditioned for a fight and then they gas out and they get hurt, that's on you. So you need to be really careful about, not careful, but you just need to be honest with yourself about what you're capable of doing.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, especially for the younger listeners out there that might be just starting out, it can be really hard to have that external perspective on where your actual skill set is. And that's why I think that there's a tremendous value in having a mentor that you can trust, and a mentor who's prepared to have the hard conversation and tell you to pull your head in when you don't know. Because like I look back on things that I was saying or that I was doing when I was in my 20s, and I was 100% sure that I was right. Right. And I look back and go, man, I was an idiot. Like, why did no one pull my head in? And then I was like, well, would I have listened? I don't know. But that is the challenge. It's the challenge of being young in an industry, is that you don't know what you don't know. And it can be hard to objectively look at your own skill set. So I think there's a tremendous value in having a mentor that you really trust. And I think that's why the traditional system of martial arts of inheriting a school from your sensei or from your instructor, or opening up a branch under someone, had value. And it's obviously not the only way to do things, but there's certainly a value there in being able to learn from someone who's been there, done that. And certainly what you're offering here with you having had several successful schools, I think there's a value there for new instructors and even just people that haven't had that business success to learn.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, especially about my previous success with my schools, because I do credit a lot of it to having a mentor at the time. I didn't. Yeah, there is an element of, yes, I'm probably naturally athletic. It's what helped me be very good at Taekwondo. There is obviously some kind of genetic factor. I'm quite tall. I'm about 6'3". That helps in Taekwondo, long legs. But with business, there's no genetics that help you be any better at business than anyone else. It's knowledge, information, and practicality. And those are the three things that I try and kind of talk to my clients about in the marketing agency, is that you need to have knowledge of the industry. So the actual know-how, like, do you know how to run X programs for your fitness clients, etc. The information. So do you know what a Facebook ad is? Do you know how to set that up? If you don't, that's why I'm here. And the practical skills of day-to-day operation, because without day-to-day operation, man, the amount of mistakes I've made where you think, oh geez, I didn't have a form for that, or I didn't have that policy in place. You don't learn that while you're learning how to get a black belt, or you don't really learn that in your kind of classic Cert 3, Cert 4. It's kind of like, here's how to invoice someone, here's how to use direct debit. Good luck. And there's so much emphasis on self-learning, which I think is great. But look, I was very fortunate to have some mentors in business early on. But I remember distinctly, one of my mentors early on was a guy named Richard Turner, who was a security and business consultant in Brisbane. And he actually owned the training academy where I did all my initial security training. And
because I kept going back there and giving him money for more qualifications, he took a role in guiding me, and he had a conversation with me back when I was like maybe 22, and I wanted to start my own security company. It was my first foray into business because I thought I could do it better, right? I could see all the failings of the industry around me, and I was like, I can do this better. Like I know what needs to be done. Every 22-year-old thinks that, but I also didn't have an appreciation of why things were the way they were. You know, like you look at the end result and you're like, oh, this could be so much better. But you need to understand the steps of how it got to that point. But there are things that Richard said to me in that conversation 12 years ago that I still reflect on now. And I finally, like, sometimes like I'll have a light bulb about something he said to me 10 years ago that didn't make any sense. That just sort of pops back into my head. I'm like, how about that? You know, like he's speaking from the place of, he's been there and done that for 30 years. He was trying to give me advice, but I wasn't ready to listen to it yet. I wasn't ready to understand it yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, that long-term mentoring is hugely beneficial.
Yeah, I think there is I want to give myself credit as well and you want to take credit for yourself when you've done a good job and you've run successful businesses like we have, where you say, I did do a lot of work. I did the study, I pushed hard. I worked, those 12-hour days, and 5 a.m. I'm getting up, 10 p.m. I'm going to bed. But there's also a point where I say, with the mentors that I've had, it wasn't that I wasn't going to get where I was going, is that I wouldn't be there now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't be as far along.
Yeah.
I'd be probably twiddling my thumb still on 50 students and being like, oh my God, what am I doing? This is so hard. And I think that's where sometimes in martial arts, especially the community center kind of schools and that kind of thing, struggle now, because like when we started, and especially when you started a bit earlier, was that, man, full-time martial arts schools were not as common. Now they're everywhere.
Barely a thing.
Yeah, there's 6 within a 7 or 8 kilometer radius of my house.
Yeah.
There's so many full-time schools, and opening a full-time school now is like, of course you will. Why wouldn't you? Because the community center model doesn't work as well, because the competition is so premium. I liken it to running a boot camp across the road from a Fitness First. Yeah. You're just not going to do as well. It's just impossible to do as well. And not because you're not as good. It's because you don't look as good or you don't seem as good. Yeah. Yep. You definitely have to start there. But yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, my community center martial arts taste. Like I remember when I was doing judo, I got to an international level in judo, paying $30 a month at a PCYC and at $100 a term at a university, and that allowed me to train 5 days a week under world level coaches. Right. But that was because no one in judo expected to make money. Like everybody had a day job. Everybody was doing it as a passion. None of my instructors were professionals in terms of what they were doing. It was all completely a passion project. And unfortunately, what ended up happening, not that the quality of training suffered it anyway, but what ended up happening is that instructors have to move for work, or they get burnt out, or they can't keep doing it because it's impacting their ability to make a living and so on. And then you lose some of those pieces that you wouldn't lose if you're at resilience under a Dan Kelly, right? You're paying a bit more, no doubt, but you've got a coach for life, and you've got someone who can actually continually upskill themselves, continually keep their learning going, because that's what they do. Rather than my first judo coach was a mechanic on garbage trucks, right? So sometimes he would be late for class because something happened at work. And half an hour less training. Or you've got a brown belt running class because you got a phone call saying, can you please do the warm up because I'm going to be late? Or so there's things like that. There's a trade-off, no doubt. There's nothing wrong starting that way, but I do think there's more avenue now for professionalization of the martial arts. Yeah, and there's a really interesting quote that I think of from Grant Cardone. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Grant Cardone. Really all over the investing space on the internet. He said in a video that you don't print money. No one makes money. Only the government makes money. But your job as a business owner is just to collect as much as you can. So yeah, when you're running, who's got my money? Yeah, who's got it? I'm going to collect it. So when I was first opening my community center school back in 2017, we opened with probably 30, 40 kids first week. It was a great start, and I was like, you know what? Community center schools, I'm limited to 50. I can only get this venue 3 days a week. I can probably fit 20 more kids in here and I'm sold out. Yeah. And that's it. And 60 is not enough to live off. So you need more students, and more students need more mats, need a bigger space. So the first community school I had, I was only in there for 10 weeks. And then I went to a full-time venue, and it just exploded, like from 40 to 250 within the first 18 months.
because we gave the venue and we offered the flexibility. And fitness and martial arts is about flexibility. Like you were saying before, you paid for one coach the $30 a month and then $100 a term at the university across two different places. It's kind of like what we're talking about before about getting MMA training. It's like, it's kind of all over the shop.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. But I think because everyone was doing it, it's like everyone had the same coaches.
Yeah.
You go up, you're like, oh, I'm training. Like, you go to a competition and you'd basically train with everyone you're fighting because if you were serious, you were going to find the same places and you'll find the same coaches. And I always thought that was really weird when I went to BJJ and people wouldn't fight their training partners. I'm like, dude, like, if I didn't fight my training partners, I'd have no one to fight. Like,
yeah. There's a point of like moving forward with a fitness business or a martial arts business where you have to say, am I going to go professional and put my money on the line? Or am I going to stay here because I'm cool having my day job as a locksmith and then, come and run the fitness class at night?
Yep.
Those people are, I think, the more likely to succeed. If they're willing to take the risk, I always tell people when I opened my gym, and I mentioned my age quite a few times, but I was 25 when I opened my club. So there was a lot of people being like, maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that. And I was like, oh man, I've been in this industry a long time too. Even though I'm only 25, I'm still 10 years in. It's not like I've not done this before, or I've not worked at clubs before or taught classes. And there's a point now where I say, you know what, if someone who's never done it, offers me some advice, I tell them to get a lease and buy some mats.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Put your money where your mouth is. I'm happy to listen to everyone 100%. I'm not going to just ignore everyone. I'm happy to listen, but I'm going to listen the most to people who have opened a gym, run a gym, and even had a gym and it failed. So I want to learn more off those people who know what not to do.
Yeah, 100%.
What didn't work.
Yeah, it's a lot more fun learning off someone else's failures than your own, let me tell you.
Yeah, exactly right. So let's move into business consulting. You work for a security company, Joe?
Yeah, so I work for Risk2 Solution. So we're actually a group of companies, and so the Risk2 Solution Group includes a security company, which is mostly security risk assessments, advice, consulting, etc. So we have a security division. We have a consulting division, which is business consulting, mostly around risk management, decision-making, leadership, and high performance. And then we have a technology division, which offers a variety of mostly security and healthcare technology solutions. We have an education division, so we have an RTO, a registered training organization, as well as an online academy for emergency management training. And we have a medical division, so we offer doctors, nurses, paramedics, and emergency responders to private businesses. So those are the five arms of our company. I'm the Victorian state manager, so I represent all of those businesses. But on a consultant level, what I deliver is mostly in the business consulting and the security consulting side. Right.
And when you're a business, are you consulting to other security businesses, or are you consulting to businesses about their security needs?
Typically it's other either government departments or large businesses about their security needs, risk assessing their sites, validating their processes and procedures, making sure, like for government, there's a whole bunch of requirements for the protective security policy framework that they have to abide by. So a lot of it's compliance based and making sure that they have what they need, or it could be addressing a specific need. So obviously with my background and my interest, an area that I work in a lot is occupational violence prevention. So looking at aggressive customers, customer on customer violence in places like a Centrelink, for example. And a
lot of retail in that?
Sorry?
A lot of retail, like BWs and Targets and places like that. I used to work at BW. It was incredibly violent sometimes. I was in Levi. Yeah, and returns and stuff. Yeah. Yeah,
so I was actually, another part of what we do, I was actually one of the lead researchers on Australia's biggest occupational violence study, which was published early this year. And retail was one of the areas we looked at. And it's an area where there's been an identifiable problem for a very long time, but they've only recently started taking measures to do something about it, which it's good, better late than never. But yeah, certainly the feedback from retail workers was that they were routinely abused and exposed to violence, whether it was against them or as customers fighting or whatever. So
I mean, I worked at Big W in Sunshine in the western suburbs here in Melbourne. It was a bit rough, and I had people like throw sticky tape dispensers at me, and like throw water bottle. And water bottles aren't heavy, but Coke bottle is 600 grams. It's not light. It still pings a little bit when it hits you in the head.
If it smacks you in the head, it would feel.
Yeah. We've got some.
It's not just about the injury; it's the fact that someone is trying to assault you at work. I mean,
Yeah,
they change the relationship with work.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that's when I really started to push, like, man, this is not the place for me. And that's tough because I think retail is somewhere that so many people need more skills and training, where you normally don't get the law graduate go jump at BW in the management level.
Yeah.
Because of the reward is probably pretty good. I remember the managers were being paid pretty well, but someone like me, I was a university student. I've got, the business degree and stuff. I probably would have been of great value to BW.
Yep.
But I didn't want to be assaulted at work, so I left.
Yeah.
And that's where like that talent pool starts to drift away.
Yeah. There's certainly like a promotion by attrition.
Yeah.
So in a lot of areas, not just retail, but in a lot of areas, it's like if you can stick it out. But the same token, I mean, if you're not prepared to deal with the problem, then I don't want to be telling other people to do things that I'm not prepared to do myself. So it's about, is this right for you? But then also having an eye to how do I improve this so that other people don't have to endure what I went through. But yeah, that's a long-term progression, and it's company culture. And that's part of what we address is one of the main things we consult on is culture and organizational culture. Yeah.
Well, we had, I think what permeates that, especially with retail, is that customer is always right mentality. And I think people, and we've seen the sovereign citizen movement happening, and I'm saying that with air quotes if you listen to this on Spotify.
Yeah, the Universal Society of Karens.
Yeah, let's talk about Karens for a second, because in Melbourne now, the mask issue, so we're right now, it is August 6th, and we are in stage 4 restrictions. 8 p.m, you have to be home, masks all the time. If you're outside, and you can't be outside for more than an hour. Only one person going to the supermarket, can't go outside of a 500 radius of your house. It's pretty intense.
Yeah.
And that's just a rundown of some quick restrictions, but that's pretty much.
I think we're actually the tightest lockdown in the world, I read. I think we're actually the tightest lockdown in the world at the moment.
Most livable, most lockable. Melbourne, Victoria. Brilliant.
The home is coming.
Yeah. And I think that customer is always right mentality has led into the internet where they think I'm a person and I have a voice now because I can type and press publish. I must be right. Whereas in the past, and I studied this when I studied media, was that if you were writing something that was published, you were probably a journalist or you were probably on TV. So there was not that the media is always 100% accurate or correct, but there was a degree of pre-qualification before you read something.
Yeah.
And I think social media only being 13 years old, YouTube, what was that, 2007? Facebook, 2006. Like, it's not a long time, not even 2 decades.
No.
There's still a whole generation of people, and they are Karens now, who learned to, whatever they read was in the newspaper or the TV, and it must be true.
Yeah.
So those essential research and analytical skills, and I'm not talking about research of you watched it on YouTube. I'm talking about peer-reviewed research like you did earlier in the year. Like, this is real research. This isn't, I Googled it, or Jordan Peterson said it, so it must be true. It's not, or Ben Shapiro said it, and it must be true. I think there's a issue right now in culture with that we know everything. And I think in business, it becomes like that as well, especially with martial arts backgrounds. It's the black belt in everything.
Yeah.
You're a black belt in that. Man, if you're a black belt in karate, it doesn't mean you should be an accountant. It doesn't mean you should be running your own ads. I mean, I didn't know how to run ads when I first started a business, but I spent $50,000 learning off someone and developing it. And ask my partner. I've lost way more in the last couple of years on testing things, but now I've got it right, and that's why I'm running what I'm running, to help other people not lose $50,000 in ad spend.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%, man.
Learn off my failures.
It's an investment. That's what it is. It's not a failure. It's an investment. If you know you're going to possibly lose the money, then it's an investment.
Yeah.
But look, I think one of the differentiators for me when I look at our clients, and as I said, like a lot of our clients are government, but we also deal with some real blue chip companies as well. And I look at how I've approached business over the years, where I've tried to do everything myself to try and cut costs, right? And there's been upsides to that. I learned how to do graphic design. I learned how to build a website. I learned how to edit a podcast. I learned how to do all sorts of things to save money because I didn't have money to spend, which is useful. But you get to a certain point where your scale is such that you are wasting your time when you could outsource that stuff, or you could get a consultant in to do it. And I look at now what some of our clients, our successful clients do. Like, they might have a skill set in-house, but that person might be like a an 8 out of 10 in something, and they can just pay a consultant who's a 10 out of 10, and they'll get a better product, and it probably won't cost them any more money because the consultant's going to do it quicker than what their in-house resource would have done it.
Yeah.
So the ability and the confidence to reach out to an outside expert and say, oh, I've got a problem here, fix it for me, send me your invoice, and be able to sort of crunch the numbers in your head and go, I'm still going to make money out of this. Like, I'm still going to save money getting consultant in.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I have an accountant who does all my books and stuff like that because I'm just not an accountant.
Yeah.
That's not my job.
I mean, you could go do a MyOb course, but why?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And imagine spending another hour of my day. I think if time is money and I value my time at X amount of dollars, if I'm spending an hour a day or maybe even 10 minutes a day on QuickBooks, kind of going through my transactions and stuff, over the course of the week, I'm spending an extra hour on it where I could be spending that on my program or making my actual business better, working on the business instead of in the business.
Yep.
Especially with and Facebook ads and advertising is such a big one, I think, because so many people are willing to lose $2,000 doing it themselves rather than just paying someone like me $2,000.
Yep.
And not getting it right straight away because I already know what's right. I already know how to do it. And not only that, so they'll lose $2,000 and then say Facebook ads don't work. And then a year later, you'll hire me after you've already wasted a year of potential, massive growth.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, there's a parallel to what you're saying here, and the reason we ended up doing the occupational violence prevention study, because when we started looking at this field more broadly, what we found is that more and more industries were recognizing that occupational violence and customer aggression was a problem, but there was no accepted best practice of how to deal with it. And there wasn't really an off-the-shelf answer. So sometimes even these big companies, or actually especially big companies, they would say, okay, this is a problem, we need to address it. And they would pick a project champion or a project manager to run it. And that person may or may not have any idea about the dynamics of customer aggression or occupational violence, right? They might pick their corporate security manager or their OH&S manager or someone, worst case scenario, they pick the guy who has a black belt and teaches kids karate on Tuesday nights. And they go, you're going to do occupational violence prevention, but he's got no idea about the layers of control. And you can have someone who is completely well-meaning and thinks they have the answers and they're doing everything they possibly can to make it work, but they end up with a product that's inferior because they just don't know what they don't know. And our whole idea for the research was, well, if there's no accepted best practice, then people are going to continue doing the best they can with what they have without having any way of validating what they're doing. So we thought, okay, let's do a research project and let's establish what is best practice in Australia, because there'd been no research to establish that in Australia. There was research in America, there was research in the UK, there was research in the Netherlands, but there was nothing in Australia with the Australian context. So we're like, okay, let's do it. Let's run it. And we did a 6-month research project to figure out what best practice looks like. And in the end, we were able to produce a checklist that we can give to clients and say, okay, if you can't afford a consultant, here's at least the things you need to consider and sign off on that you've gone through it. So at least they've got some idea. And it saves everyone having to make the same mistakes over and over. I think that's kind of a way that we've been able to add a little bit of value to those that wouldn't otherwise engage a consultant and say, okay, at the very least, here's a framework to work with.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of what there's a parallel there with the advertising. Like, you can try and do it yourself. You can do all the free courses. You can be well-meaning. But if you haven't got the technical expertise and you haven't got the runs on the board, it's going to be very hard to get the same results.
Yeah. I mean, it's in all sincerity from myself is that over the last couple, we've done over $1 million in sales from Facebook ads. It's not a joke. Like, this is not small time. I'm going to sell a little ebook and kind of try and dog you into me teaching you something. Like, I've actually done it. It's actually happened. Like, it's like you consulting, for example, if you were to consult me on my occupational hazards or the kind of stuff that I need in my workplace, I'm not going to try and do it myself. I don't know what I'm doing. I can try. I can copy it off the WorkSafe website or something and try and make it a bit easier. But we've had customers yell and scream and stuff about their kids' memberships and stuff. But I don't pretend to be an expert on something that I'm not an expert on. Yeah.
And look, I think it's just one of those things. Like, it's everyone. There's the Dunning-Kruger effect is everywhere.
Yeah.
Less you know about something, the more you think you know about it, and a little bit of knowledge can cure that quite quickly. it's something we try to help our clients with. We put out a lot of free education, be able to at least expose to them or make them more aware of where they might be lacking in terms of their internal capacity to be able to assist with growth. Because at the end of the day, we want everyone to be safer and everyone to be performing better, because the rising tide lifts all ships. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Speaking of the rising tide, I guess the proliferation now of people on the internet, you've seen stocks and things like Amazon and Afterpay has been the story of the year investment wise, and Afterpay's rocketed, obviously. Places like DocuSign has recently skyrocketed as well. All those kind of online initiatives for purchasing things, e-commerce has gone through the roof. Where do you see security and that kind of thing in an era where more people are working from home and maybe less people are in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big conversation. It's something I've talked about previously, because everyone thinks the natural pivot is cybersecurity.
Right. Okay.
And I disagree. I mean, I 100% agree. I mean, I disagree and I agree. I agree that cybersecurity is going to become more essential. It's already essential. More people are going to be aware of it, I guess, and their cybersecurity loopholes and how well protected their company information is when it's being accessed on personal computers, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's going to be of interest. But for me, when I look at technology and cybersecurity and the different ways we leverage technology, the common denominator is always humans, right? What people think that hackers sit there and they run algorithms to break codes, but the most efficient way of hacking is to get someone to tell you what their password is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I saw something on LinkedIn this morning, like it was this big matrix of how long it takes to hack a password based on the number of characters and whether it's got upper and lowercase and numbers and symbols and so on. I said, but what if I have an 18-character password with lowercase, uppercase, symbols, and numbers, but I've also got it written on a Post-it note stuck to my monitor? Like,
yeah.
And so the human element is the constant, and I think the evolution in all those fields is building human capacity, because now essentially what we've done is we've given human beings a bigger lever. The technology is just a lever, right? We can affect much more change from our home office now than what we ever could before, but we've got to know where we're putting the thing. Like, we've got to know what we're going to do. We've got to know what's going to happen when we press that lever. Yeah. And there's so much of that I think we just need to upskill our human beings to make better decisions and be more risk informed, so that they can capitalize on opportunities when they present, and they can mitigate threats when they present. But I don't think the answer is more controls. I think the answer is better capacity and better decision making. Yeah,
that's a really interesting point, because I want to contrast that with being able to run your own marketing and ads and your Google AdWords and your SEO and stuff, because there was a huge opportunity in March and going through now the lockdown, where more people are at home, where more people signed up for online fitness programs, more people signed up for those, apps like TIFXO and Keep It Cleaner and things like that, where they would kind of proliferate. They were just exploding because there was just so much desire to be able to work out from home because all the gyms closed. I mean, I don't know about you, but trying to buy barbells in March, good luck. I actually made some.
Man, I sold so much gear right before the lockdown. I was kicking myself. I could have made 2 times as much if I'd waited 2 weeks.
Yeah, and then there were people who were buying all of it so they could sell it.
Yeah.
Like 2 weeks later, they're like, they ordered. All of a sudden, someone's got, I'm selling 5 barbells brand new. I'm like, why did you have 5 barbells at home?
No, someone's just ripped someone off and gone, I can make a fortune out of this.
Yeah. And there were gyms closing and things like that because they weren't ready to pivot to online. And I think there's a big connection between what you just said and what I'm about to say, is that there's a difference between knowing how to have a social media account and knowing what content to put up and knowing how to run paid advertising on social media.
Yeah.
It's a completely different thing. Knowing how to engage customers on social media is different to having a paid advertising stream that generates revenue at a predictable pace. Knowing your numbers, your lifetime value and things like that. So you know how much you're willing to invest to buy a client, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think it's so easy, especially when you don't know something. Like it's an important step when you get to a point where you at least realize you don't know how to do something and you seek out an answer. It can be very simple very attractive to go, you know what, I'm going to go pay for this automation service and I'm going to buy this ebook with all these scripts in it, and I'm going to apply those scripts and I'm going to plug it into an automation service, and that's going to solve my problem. Yeah. Because I can do all that for $200.
Yeah.
Versus You still got to know what to put in. Like, you've still got to know the audience. You still got to know what's going to appeal to them. You still got to understand the psychology of the purchase. Like, there's so much that you have to understand to be able to pull it off, or else you're just putting out a lot of content that doesn't hit.
Yeah. I just want to give a hot tip to anyone listening to right now who's running ads for martial arts. Don't put interested in martial arts, because they don't know they're interested in martial arts yet. That's why they're not members of a martial arts gym. Because if you put interested in martial arts, the only people that are going to come up are members somewhere else.
Yeah.
They're already members somewhere else. Okay.
Yeah, if they're going to leave them to go to you, they're probably going to leave you to go somewhere else.
No one is already interested in Taekwondo. No one's like, man, I love Taekwondo. I just love watching it. I can't wait for a school to open up. Trust me, if they're already interested, they're already doing it, or their kids are already doing it somewhere else. So that's just a free tip for everyone. Don't put that in your audience.
Yeah.
I think there's a big difference between, I see this a lot. Actually, you ask a personal trainer, who's running your Instagram? And they're like, oh, my girlfriend. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, is she like a marketer? Is she work in marketing? Like, nah, she just loves Instagram. I love movies too, but I'm not filming one. I'm not Tom Cruise, despite the resemblance. No, I'm only joking. No, I'm not doing things that I see you doing what you're doing, but I'm not starting a security business because I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But I think social media, because everyone has a social media account, everyone thinks they have at least some level of expertise. And I've had calls like that where someone would say, but what, how many followers do you have and stuff like that? And I'm like, oh man, I've got more than you need. Trust me.
Yeah.
And I've got more dollars coming through than I have followers. And that's, you don't pay the rent with followers is what I always say.
Yeah. 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 No, I think also people undervalue it. I mean, like from my perspective, like I don't invest in marketing as much as I should. And a large part of that has been just, it's a hobby. Like certainly when I was talking about our corporate business, yes, we do. Like we engage a PR firm. We've got all this other stuff going on because that's where the money comes from.
Yes.
And I think sometimes martial artists get trapped in that hobby mindset where they're still treating their business like a hobby and they don't want to sink too much money into it just in case it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But then you're kind of shortchanging your ability for it to work or the possibility for it to work because you're not investing enough into it. But I think it's people are a little bit gun shy about making an investment they're not sure about or something that they don't know. They can't see, they can't forecast the outcome. So like, paying $2,000 for a consultant sounds like a lot of money. If you knew for sure that you would get $5,000 back in the first 6 months, not a bad deal.
It's that old dollar in a vending machine, isn't it? Like if I put $1 in a vending machine and $2 came out, how long would you stand there?
Yeah.
Probably until you run out of dollar coins, right? Like you're going to stand there for a while. When I put, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on an advertising campaign for my businesses, I know I'm getting 15, 20, 25K at the back end.
Yeah.
So I don't mind about putting 5,000, but I tell someone that I tell my mum that I'm putting 5,000 on ads and she can feel sick.
Yeah.
She's like, what do you mean you're spending $5,000? Are you sure? And I said, Mum, trust me, 5 years in, I know I'm sure.
Yeah. Exactly. But and again, that's the advantage of experience. Like you have confidence that you're doing the right thing, and I think that's another advantage of a consultant who has a track record that you can go, okay, I can trust him. I don't have to trust myself and that I know the right thing. I can trust him because he's got a track record and I believe what he's doing. But again, that makes like the consultants get such a bad rep, I think, in every field because everybody's a goddamn consultant, right?
Yeah.
Everybody is an expert and we're so used to being deceived and lied to. It can be really hard to cut through that and know for sure that you're going to get value and that you're not just going to get ripped off. Or, I'm not like my ebook normally valued at $497 is valued at just 99 cents for today only. It's like, well, if you can sell for 99 cents, it wasn't worth $500, dude.
It probably wasn't worth. The market decides what it's worth.
It's a 16-page document.
We give this, and I think that's the problem, especially in the fitness space with marketing consultants and agencies, is that there's so many people teaching people how to do it that don't own a gym. I purposely, in my ads getting leads for my agency, I'm literally standing in my gym. It's literally a selfie. I didn't hire a photographer. I'm like, I own a gym. Look at it. It's behind me. I'm right here in it. This is actually a real thing that I run. It's not, I'm teaching you how to run a gym and like, I don't need to run a gym because I understand marketing. It's like, well, you need to at least understand a part of what's going on, When I first started the agency, I was kind of thinking like, maybe I shouldn't run fitness because there's so much skepticism in that market on how marketing should be done. And everyone thinks they're going to be F45. And I'm telling you, you're not. F45's taken that spot. They were first. They did a great job. Well done to Rob and his whole team selling it out. Mark Wahlberg's an owner now, I think. It's the dream.
Yep.
That dream is over. Don't expect to open 3,000 gyms. Be happy with one. That makes you 100K a year doing what you like, training people. Be happy with 2 in 5 years. That's great.
Yeah, don't try to be the next anything. Like at the end of the day, like, you need to create something that's uniquely your own, because running a business is hard. Like it's hard work. It's soul crushing. And if you're doing it because you're trying to follow someone else's model, you're not going to last. Like you need to do it because you love it. And I think with nearly every success story, it's like an F45 or a CrossFit or whoever. It's an expression of who the founder was as a human being, and it just happened to be unique, and it happened to hit. But I don't think F45 would be I forgot his name now, the founder of F45. I don't think he'd be any less satisfied if he had 10 gyms, right?
Sure,
I mean, I'm sure it's nice having a Lamborghini, but it's, at the end of the day, I mean, it's an expression of what he wanted to create, and he created it, and it lived and it breathed. And that's the exciting part of being a business owner. It's creating something that didn't exist before you and will continue to exist after you. That to me is what excites me about business consulting, is creating something that's an entity in its own right. It's like birthing a child, you know. But it's got to be unique. If you're just trying to clone something that someone else has done, thinking you'll cash in, you're not going to have longevity.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of my mentors, Paul Vellman, was saying to me a few months ago about what you would do if you retired. So if the martial arts school got to 10 million a year, you didn't have to work there anymore. Like, what would you do if you could leave right now with 10 million, exit it, and what would you do with your life? And I said, I'd probably turn up to the club to teach classes, to be honest, because that's what I like doing. I'd probably run the marketing agency because I like marketing. I read the books all the time. I'm not reading these books for a laugh. I enjoy it. Marketing to me is like a science. It's like a sport. Like, it's me versus Facebook in a way. I'm trying to get the most out of people for other people. I like helping people. I would do this even if I didn't get paid for it.
Yeah, man. And that's the exciting thing. Like when you find something like that, and I've had the same conversation. Like if I won the lotto or whatever, like if I didn't need money, what would I do? And I'd probably end up doing more or less what I'm doing now. I'd probably outsource like the 40% of my job I don't like, but I'd still be doing the same kind of stuff. Like I'd probably be running 3 podcasts instead of 2. I'd probably be interviewing Tony Robbins on my yacht. But I'd still be, I'd be doing the same sort of stuff, just probably at a different scale and maybe different ratios. But I mean, my mentor and my boss, Dr. Gav Schneider, he's also a very high credentialed martial artist. He had a bit of a harsh mentor chat with me because I was a bit bummed out about something. We had been down on sales for a while, and I was in a bit of a low state. And he said, "You need to stop your millennial bullshit."
Fair enough.
And he said, if you're in a position where you enjoy 60% of your job, you are in the right job.
Yeah.
If you enjoy 60% of what you do, that's fine. If 40% is shit, then that's just the cost of doing business. But when you don't have to worry about the money, you might be able to shift those ratios a little bit. But that was a good takeaway for me. I was like, do I enjoy 60% of what I do? Yeah, absolutely. Is the 10 or 20% that I really don't like? Is that worth the cost of admission of getting to do the other stuff? Yeah.
Yep.
But it can be hard when you've been surrounded by that 10% or that 20% for a couple of months. Like right now, I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of martial arts instructors out there that love teaching classes. They don't like what they've got to do to survive right now.
No one going to it to teach online Zoom classes. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. I mean, if you did, I mean, you're having a ball right now.
Yeah. I'm actually really enjoying it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I really didn't think I would. I was like, okay, I'm just going to bring that same energy. Now, it's not the same energy, but it's a different energy. It's different. It's a different kind of good. Yeah. It's a different kind of enthusiasm. I'm playing games with the kids online that you probably wouldn't play, in a real setting. I'm getting them to change their virtual background to pictures of me and things like that. Or everyone changed their virtual background to donuts today. Like, we're just going to do Taekwondo for donuts today.
Nice.
We're just making it as fun as possible and engaging as possible. And I think when you enjoy what you do, it comes through.
Yeah.
When you see, I used to be when I was a school teacher, the teachers are like, if you can tell the teacher doesn't want to be there anymore.
Yeah.
They're just doing it because they're contracted. They just want to keep on moving. But if you don't do it, if you don't love it anymore, you got to stop at some point.
Yeah. Passion is so important.
It's so important.
Yeah. And I think that's with everything. Like if you stop caring about what you're doing, it's time to move on. Or at least it's time to change what you're doing, like to
Yeah.
change the angle or the approach, or like you need to do something to re-spark you. And we all go through ebbs and flows professionally of like, I'm really into this, I'm not really into it at the moment. And you can go through 6 months where you might have other stuff going on in your life. Like your work-life balance is a myth, especially when you work and live in the same place right now. But that's a myth. You're a total human being, and you're going to be impacted by what someone said on Facebook at work, whether you like it or not. But I think it's important to understand there will be ebbs and flows of your motivation and what you want to do and how you want to do it and how excited you are to do it. But it's got to be, again, having a mentor or a partner who can pull you up on your bullshit and go, hey, do you want to do this or not? Because no one's forcing you to.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. And I think pushing your business in times where people don't often push is a huge opportunity for growth at the minute for especially if you want to run online PT or online martial arts. We've had some really good success getting some more people. We actually signed up 5 or 6 people in the last 2 weeks to online programs. Whereas if you're not doing anything right now, you've missed out on those 5 or 6 people.
Yeah.
And is it more expensive to get clients right now? Of course. Yeah. Because people aren't in the mood. To be honest, in Melbourne, people are really not in the mood to do anything new. They're kind of like, man, this sucks.
Yep.
But there's going to be a slingshot effect coming very soon. So I suggest, even if it's with me or with anyone else, get your marketing on point, because it's a big tidal wave coming. And like you said before, Joe, the rising tide raises all ships, but you want to make sure you're on the right side of that tide and not beached because you didn't do anything for 3 months.
Yeah, you want to make sure you didn't put your anchor down and you're going to get swamped.
Yeah, exactly right.
We've said before that the best time to hunt is when your competitors are hibernating. Right?
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it.
It's you have to. It's less effort for the results. You don't have to be best. You just have to be there. I've got a friend of mine who's run a very successful business in Melbourne for the last 20 years, or several successful businesses. And he said the key to sales in Australia is just showing up, because so few people actually bother to show up. Just show up consistently and you'll pick up sales, because so many people just accept defeat and stop showing up.
Right. Yeah. Brilliant, mate. I think that's a brilliant way to end the show. Show up, guys. The slingshot's coming. The tide will rise again. Don't drop your anchor in July and spite yourself. What is it? Don't cut off your nose to spite your face. So right now, the nose is in the ground, or it's covered up by a mask, actually, if you're still in Melbourne with us.
Hopefully. Wear your goddamn mask correctly, people.
Wear your mask, Karen, because the rising tide's coming. Don't drop your anchor now. Joe, it's been a pleasure. Guys, if you're listening to the podcast now, if you enjoyed the show, go follow Joe's podcast, Managing Violence. Check him out on Facebook. Search up all the stuff. We'll put some links in the descriptions and things like that. Joe, I really appreciate your time today, man. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, man. If you want to see more about the podcast, go to violencepod.com.
Violencepod.com.
All the links are there. You can follow it on all the different platforms. Thanks, Adam. I really had a great time. It was good to talk about some different content.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
No worries, man. All the best.
Like and subscribe to Story X, the show, Managing Violence podcast. See you later, guys.